What if a queen could speak to the skies? And they listened. In the far northern reaches of South Africa, tucked between lush forests and towering mountains, lies a secret legacy, an ancient power passed from mother to daughter, guarded in whispers and rituals. Her name was Modjadji. To her people, she wasn't just a monarch, she was the rain itself. She didn't rule with armies or swords, she ruled with storms. According to legend, she could summon the clouds and break droughts with sacred ceremonies known only to her bloodline. But was she real? Could one woman isolated in the royal kraal truly command the skies? And if so, how did she do it? Western history books rarely speak her name, and yet, across centuries, African kings and colonial generals alike paid tribute to her, fearful of invoking drought, or worse. She was called the Rain Queen, a title passed down through generations in the Balobedu tribe. Hidden in the green ridges of Limpopo, her story has lived on through oral tradition, guarded by elders, encoded in dances, preserved in secrecy. Her power was not just spiritual, it was political, a blessing and a warning all at once. This isn't folklore wrapped in fantasy. It's a lived reality that shaped a region. The village of Modjadji V, named after the dynasty, still stands today, surrounded by forests that seem to breathe with ancient knowledge. The Balobedu people have long believed their queen could maintain balance between the earth and sky. When drought threatened the land, it wasn't priests or soldiers they turned to. It was her. But how did it all begin? Who was the first woman brave enough to claim the rain as her realm? And how has this mystical matriarchal line endured in a world dominated by patriarchal systems? The rain-making rituals were never written down. No outsiders were ever allowed to see them. Even today, much of what we know about Queen Modjadji's power is wrapped in silence, reverence, and mystery. In this video, we'll explore the astonishing legacy of the Rain Queens of South Africa. From sacred duties to political symbolism, from prophecy to power, we'll unravel the truth behind a queen whose voice may have once echoed through thunder. Let's begin where the clouds gather, where the rains first answered a queen's call. Long before the title of Rain Queen was known across the land, a quiet but profound shift was happening deep in the heart of southern Africa. Among the ancestral tribes that migrated across the continent, the Balobedu emerged, not merely as a people with customs and culture, but as stewards of a prophecy. They settled in the Limpopo Valley, where the mountains cradle the clouds and the air always tastes of rainfall. This land would become sacred, and it was here that a legend began. According to Balobedu oral tradition, their lineage can be traced back to the Monomotapa Empire in what is now Zimbabwe. The story goes that centuries ago, a great chief's daughter was exiled for becoming pregnant out of wedlock, a dishonor in her father's eyes. But what was seen as disgrace turned out to be destiny. She fled south with a trusted group of followers and found refuge in the highlands of Limpopo. There she gave birth to a daughter who was said to be blessed by the ancestors, marked with the rare and divine gift, the power to call rain from the heavens. This child would grow into the first Modjadji, a name that means ruler of the day. Her mother's shame was transformed into sovereignty. The rain-making gift was not taught, not acquired. It was inherited, and so began the line of sacred queens, passed down only from mother to daughter, never interrupted by men or war. This was not simply royalty. This was divine continuity, a spiritual matriarchy rooted in myth and soil. The Balobedu people believed the queen was more than human. She was a vessel of ancestral energy, a link between the earthly and the divine. Her very existence was seen as a fulfillment of prophecy, one whispered from the spirits that a line of queens would rise to protect the balance of nature. Her role wasn't symbolic. It was elemental, When drought loomed, when rivers dried and crops withered, it was to her that the people turned. Her rain-making rituals, shrouded in secrecy and conducted deep in forest sanctuaries, were said to coax life from the sky. And it wasn't just her own people who revered her. Neighboring kingdoms respected the Rain Queen, often sending offerings to maintain peace and to secure her favor. Chiefs would travel long distances to consult with her or seek her spiritual intercession. Even those who did not fully believe in her power hesitated to offend her, because if there was even a sliver of truth, who would dare provoke the woman who could withhold the rain? The first Rain Queen ruled in silence. She didn't speak publicly. She rarely appeared in open ceremonies. She lived in seclusion, surrounded by trusted advisors and priestesses. Her aura grew from mystery, not might, and that mystery became the foundation of her power. Each successor was groomed in secret, chosen from the queen's daughters, raised in preparation to inherit both the crown and the storm. This was the birth of a mystical matriarchy, one that defied the norms of a continent and indeed a world dominated by kings and warriors. In the kingdom of the Balobedu, it was not the blade or the spear that ruled, it was the rain. And at the center of it all was a woman chosen by prophecy, respected in silence and crowned by the skies themselves. The power of the Rain Queen didn't lie in what she said, because she rarely spoke. It was in what she carried, what she represented, and what she could do when the sky refused to open. Her authority was woven into ritual, into secrecy, into the way clouds gathered when no one expected them to. Rainmaking wasn't a spectacle. It was a sacred covenant between the queen, her ancestors, and the natural world. The rituals themselves were known only to a small inner circle of priestesses and spiritual advisors, often drawn from the royal household or carefully selected lineages. Outsiders never saw the ceremonies, not even chiefs. The process began long before droughts turned desperate. Months ahead, in silence, in preparation, the queen would retreat into ceremonial isolation, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. She would fast, meditate, and commune with ancestral spirits. The location of the rituals was deep in the forest, where sunlight barely pierced the canopy, and the air hung heavy with the scent of herbs and smoke. There, offerings were made: milk, honey, traditional beer, and sometimes blood from a sacrificed animal. These were laid at sacred shrines or buried in earth mounds believed to be channels to the spiritual world. The queen, dressed in ceremonial robes passed down through generations, would sit surrounded by sacred objects: gourds filled with rainwater from previous blessings, bones used for divination, and clay vessels painted with ancestral symbols. The priestesses would sing in low, repetitive rhythms, invocations in ancient dialects vibrating with spiritual energy, believed to open pathways between the living and the unseen. One key element was the sacred rain medicine, a concoction whose ingredients remain a closely guarded secret to this day. It was believed to be a blend of local herbs, rare roots, and elements collected from sacred sites. When burned or poured into the soil during the ritual, it was said to awaken the spirits of rain. And then, always, the queen would raise her hands to the sky, not in demand, but in reverent dialogue. Her gestures were part prayer, part command, and sometimes the skies would answer, slowly at first, a mist, then a drop, then thunder rolling from the hills like applause from the gods. This power demanded sacrifice. The queen lived in deliberate isolation from the public and was expected to remain celibate throughout her reign. Marriage was forbidden. Her interactions were limited, often only with her closest advisors, maidens, and ritual aides. Even her children were often born through carefully arranged unions, never public, always concealed. This wasn't just about purity. It was about protecting the sanctity of the rain power, believed to be fragile, easily corrupted by earthly emotion or political manipulation. Her life was not her own. It was in service of a force far greater than any individual desire. But isolation was not weakness, it was strength. And with that strength came fear, not the kind born from terror, but the kind that flows from awe. Neighboring kings and chiefs understood that crossing the Rain Queen wasn't just a political misstep, it was a spiritual risk. If crops failed or rivers dried after angering her, blame didn't fall on nature, it fell on you. That belief, whether myth or mechanism, created a political buffer zone around her. Her kingdom, modest in territory, held influence far beyond its borders. Even European colonizers approached her with caution. During the 19th century, when British authorities sought to control native populations, they didn't strip the Rain Queen of her title. Instead, they worked through intermediaries, afraid to fully interfere with her rituals. They recognized that to the people she wasn't just a leader, she was the weather itself. And in a land where drought could mean death, power over rain was the ultimate weapon. There are accounts of rival leaders traveling hundreds of kilometers just to deliver gifts, beads, cattle, cloth, hoping to stay in her favor. These weren't tributes to a military force. They were offerings to an unseen energy believed to be governed by the woman cloaked in storm. The Rain Queen's presence was always distant, yet profoundly felt. She rarely made public appearances, but her silence spoke volumes. Her absence carried power because it forced others to imagine her strength rather than witness it. To this day, many of the ritual details remain shrouded in mystery. Even modern historians struggle to separate fact from legend. But maybe that's the point. The Rain Queen's power was never meant to be dissected or fully understood. Its strength lay in the unknown, in the sacred silence between storm and soil. That silence was never empty. It was full of ancient voices, ancestral warnings, and the possibility of thunder. And so she ruled, not from a throne, but from within a storm. She didn't need armies. Her power flowed from the clouds, the rivers, and the fear in every eye. She was born into a legacy already heavy with myth. By the time Modjadji V ascended the throne in 1972, the world around her had changed dramatically. Colonial lines had been drawn and redrawn. Traditional powers were being dismantled or absorbed, and apartheid had carved deep fractures across South Africa. Yet in the midst of this, the Rain Queen remained, an enigma wrapped in tradition, cloaked in silence. Modjadji V would become not only one of the most revered, but also one of the most politically significant Rain Queens in modern history. Her birth name was Makoma Modjadji, and like her foremothers, she was groomed from an early age to carry a power that most of the world doubted, but few dared to challenge. Her upbringing was secluded, steeped in custom and spiritual training. From a young age, she was shielded from public life, not out of protection, but preparation. She was being readied not just to rule, but to become the Rain. Every teaching, every ritual, every silence was an initiation into something far older than language. Modjadji V inherited the throne after the passing of her grandmother, Queen Modjadji IV. Skipping a generation was not unusual in Balabedu tradition, especially when spiritual signs pointed to a chosen successor. When she took her place as Rain Queen, the people didn't expect speeches or proclamations. They watched the skies, and in the early years of her reign, rainfall was abundant, fields thrived, rivers flowed strong. To many, this wasn't coincidence, it was confirmation. She had been chosen rightly, yet her reign wasn't defined solely by the rain. Modjadji V ruled during an era of severe political repression. The apartheid regime was in full force, and the South African government had a long history of undermining traditional leadership structures. But Modjadji V, ever silent in public, became a powerful symbol of resistance, not through protest, but through presence. She preserved a distinctly African matriarchal institution in a nation designed to erase indigenous systems. Her quiet leadership reminded the people that not all power could be subdued. Leaders across Africa and the world took notice. Nelson Mandela famously referred to her as a queen among queens. After his release from prison, one of his first symbolic acts was to pay her a visit. He bowed before her, not out of political necessity, but cultural reverence. That image, Mandela bowing before a woman believed to control the skies, was more than symbolic. It was a recognition that power did not always need a microphone or a military to be real. Throughout her reign, Modjadji V remained fiercely private. She continued the traditions of ritual seclusion, celibacy, and spiritual leadership. Her palace, nestled in the village of Ketlakone, was less a court and more a sanctuary. Foreigners were rarely granted access. Her own appearances were limited to highly sacred events, often during times of drought or important national moments. The mystery surrounding her only magnified her presence. Her absence, as always, was part of her power. There were controversies too. Within the royal household, disputes occasionally arose about succession and lineage. Some questioned the decision to bypass certain family members in favor of Modjadji V, but as always, the decision was guided by the elders, by tradition, and by omens, never politics. And in a way, that separation from conventional governance made her role even more potent. She didn't need to justify her place. The reins did that for her, and the people in turn gave their loyalty not to a person, but to the spirit of reign itself. Unlike many African monarchs whose influence dwindled with time, Modjadji V's reputation only grew. She came to embody both the past and the possibility of the future. Her image appeared in art, literature, and even state discussions. For many young South Africans, she was a living connection to a history they were just beginning to reclaim. She didn't need speeches to teach. Her silence was a kind of education, one that spoke of endurance, sovereignty, and sacred obligation. Modjadji V passed away in 2001. Her death marked the end of an era. For many, it felt like the clouds themselves paused in mourning. Rain didn't fall for weeks in some areas. Whether that was coincidence or cosmic punctuation, it deepened the sense that something ancient had shifted. The woman who had ruled without being seen, who had summoned rain without being heard, was gone. But she didn't leave a void. She left a legacy, one rooted not in conquest, but continuity, in holding firm to an identity that predated colonization, and in weathering storms, political and literal. Modjadji V proved that real power isn't always loud. Sometimes it waits in the silence before rain. After Modjadji V's death in 2001, the clouds did not just part, they lingered in stillness as if awaiting instruction from a queen no longer there. Her passing left a spiritual vacuum not easily filled, and what followed was a period of confusion, dispute, and quiet mourning, a fragile time when a tradition centuries old stood on the edge of uncertainty. Modjadji VI, her daughter and heir, was just a teenager when the mantle was passed to her. Young, untested, and inheriting a dynasty rooted in complex ritual and social expectation, she faced an impossible challenge. While the succession had precedent, some traditional leaders questioned whether she was ready. Others whispered of omens being ignored. In a system where legitimacy was deeply intertwined with spirituality, even the smallest deviation from ancestral protocol could stir unrest among the faithful. Unlike her predecessors, Modjadji VI came of age in a modern, fast-changing South Africa. The sacred seclusion, celibacy, and ritual duties that once shaped a Rain Queen's life were harder to reconcile with the pressures of the outside world. Her reign was short, and her untimely death in 2005, under circumstances still debated, deepened the sense of uncertainty. Official accounts described her passing as due to illness. Yet in the kingdom, rumors swirled of spiritual imbalance, of broken customs, of ancestors not properly honored. It was not just a queen that had died, but perhaps the fragile thread tying a living tradition to the divine. With her death, the direct line of succession was thrown into question. No clear heir was named. The royal court splintered into factions. For the first time in generations, the throne of the Rain Queen stood empty, and with it, the ceremonies stopped. The rain rituals fell silent. A tradition once guarded by fire and storm was now caught in bureaucracy, contested by internal family dynamics, modern governance, and shifting cultural values. What had once been unquestioned had now become a source of tension and uncertainty. The South African government, recognizing the cultural significance of the Rain Queen, eventually stepped in, offering funding, legal protections, and public support. But some critics argued that institutional involvement diluted the very essence of the tradition. Could a sacred legacy rooted in secrecy and oral knowledge truly survive in the framework of constitutional democracy and modern statecraft? Could a queen who once ruled clouds now be advised by ministers and budget committees? Despite the turmoil, the spirit of the Rain Queen did not disappear. Among the Balobedu, elders continue to pass down stories of Modjadji's power. Shrines are still visited, songs still remembered, and though the throne may be empty, the reverence for the Rain Queen has never fully faded. In fact, her mystery may be more powerful now than ever, because in her absence, myth and memory intertwine more tightly than before. The silence left behind has become fertile ground for legend. Today, there are active movements, both within the royal family and among cultural leaders, to revive the tradition. Several family members have been named as potential successors, with debates continuing about who should be crowned next. Some advocate for the full return of spiritual rainmaking duties, while others call for a modernization of the role, a ceremonial queen who preserves heritage without the demanding isolation of the past. It is a question that cuts to the heart of heritage itself. Should tradition evolve with time, or must it remain untouched to retain its sanctity? Beyond the borders of Limpopo, the Rain Queen's story has taken on new life. Artists, filmmakers, and writers have resurrected her legacy, seeing in her a symbol of feminine strength, indigenous wisdom, and cultural endurance. Academic interest in the Balobedu monarchy has grown exponentially. University lectures, exhibitions, and documentaries now explore the intersection of gender, power, and spirituality through the lens of Modjadji's reign. She has become more than a historical figure. She has become a cultural mythos, and her legacy has found echoes in global movements. In a world facing climate anxiety, environmental degradation, and spiritual longing, the idea of a queen who could speak to the clouds carries renewed significance. The Rain Queen is not just remembered, she is needed. Her story challenges modern assumptions. It reminds us of a time when leadership meant communion with nature, when silence held more power than speeches, and when a single woman could move nations not by decree, but by rainfall. Whether or not the royal lineage is officially restored, the Rain Queen endures. She lives in the imagination of her people, in the forests where rituals once stirred the air, in the eyes of young girls taught to respect the sky and the soil. She lives in stories, in art, in the weathered voices of grandmothers who still say, "She made it rain." Rain is life. And for centuries in the kingdom of the Balobedu, that life was carried not by science or chance, but by a queen. We began this story with a question. What if a queen could speak to the skies, and they listened? We followed the path of myth and memory, from the secluded hills of Limpopo to the echoes of ritual songs still sung in reverence. We discovered that the Rain Queen was no legend of fiction, but a real sovereign figure, anointed by her people, feared by her rivals, and respected by history itself. Her power wasn't only in the storms she summoned, but in the traditions she preserved, the silence she held, and the balance she maintained between earth and sky. Was it real? Could she really make it rain? The answer lies somewhere between faith and history, somewhere in the soil where ritual offerings once disappeared, in the clouds that formed above her forest sanctuary, and in the hearts of the Balobedu who still believe. Belief, after all, can be as powerful as thunder. It shapes lives, commands respect, and preserves memory long after facts are forgotten. And why was her power feared? Because it represented a force outside of control, outside of armies, parliaments, or colonial logic. A woman who could call forth rain without lifting a weapon, a throne built on silence, not conquest. In a world built to favor loud, visible dominance, the Rain Queen was a quiet threat to the order. She didn't fight for power. Power came to her. Her legacy challenges everything we think we know about leadership, gender, and spirituality. At a time when so many cultures erased or undermined women, the Balobedu elevated them to the highest place, and not just as figureheads, but as spiritual sovereigns. Queens whose influence extended beyond their borders, who turned drought into abundance, and whose rituals held the attention of kings and colonizers alike. As we trace her story across generations, from the first matriarch who turned exile into prophecy, to Modjadji V, who stood as a beacon of cultural resilience, to the still unanswered future of Modjadji's throne, we find not just a narrative of queens, but a reflection of something greater. This is the story of a people who dared to place trust in women, in nature, in mystery, and in doing so, created one of the most enduring legacies in African history. Today, the skies over Limpopo still shift with meaning. A sudden downpour is not just weather, it's memory. It's a whisper of power once held, perhaps still watching. The story of the Rain Queen isn't over. It lingers in the mist, in the questions we still ask, in the silence before the storm. It asks us to believe in more than just politics or history books. It dares us to listen to the land, to the ancestors, and to the possibility that some forces remain beyond explanation. So the next time the rain falls without warning, remember Modjadji. Remember the queen who didn't need to be seen to be believed. The queen who turned silence into rain. Remember that true power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. And then, like rain after drought, it changes everything. If this story moved you, if it made you feel the weight and wonder of a forgotten history, then don't let it fade. Like this video, share it with someone who values untold stories, and subscribe for more journeys into the hidden corners of our shared past, where myth and memory meet, and where power still lingers in the rain. Because history isn't just in books, it lives in the rain.